Welcome everyone to episode 11 of the Next Experience Academy. We are happy to have so many people here interested in Next Experience topics. And let's go ahead and get going and do some introductions. There we go. I'll go ahead and start. My name is Brad Tilton. I am a senior principal outbound product manager on the platform web UX team, and I cover UI Builder, Workspaces, and all sorts of things like that. John or Ashley.
So I'm John Lind, and I am a principal product success manager. So I'm kind of Brad's counterpart for engaging with our customers and making sure that they're successful with the next experience in the UI Builder.
Hey everyone, I'm Ashley Snyder. I'm a principal outbound product manager. I am on Brad's team. I support areas such as knowledge management and the admin center. I'm really excited to be here with you guys today.
All right. Thanks, y'all. So a little bit of housekeeping before we move on. There's both a chat and a Q&A. If you have a question that you want us to answer, whether live on the air, through the Q&A feature, or afterwards, use the Q&A feature and not the chat feature. There's enough people on this webinar that keeping up with the chat is going to be pretty difficult for us. So please do use the Q&A feature. If you ask a question in the chat, it may not get answered. So the chat you can use for comments and things like that. It will get saved. But for questions, we want you to primarily use the Q&A feature. We are recording this session. It will be, once it gets, once Zoom generates the recording, we'll take it, we'll edit it, and then we'll post the session and the slides out on the community on our Next Experience Academy page. All right, what should we expect? These sessions are for you. Please ask questions. If we get too many questions to answer live, that'll be great. We track all these questions, and it helps us know where people are struggling or where all of the questions are, so we know what type of enablement material to create. And then any comments, any feedback that you have on products or the Academy, let us know. We are going to be in the product quite a bit. We've got a few slides to get to, but we'll be doing some demos of some different tips and tricks and that sort of thing as we go through. And then we will be back soon. This is on me. I didn't update this slide apparently, but we'll be back the third Wednesday of August, whatever that is. So ignore this July 19th thing because that's today. All right. And you thought we were going to skip it, but safe harbor, we may say something that's forward looking. Vancouver is about to come out in early availability in a couple of weeks. So if we do, just know that we're product managers. Things can always change. Don't make any financial decisions based on what we share here. All right. So today's agenda, we have some intros. We did those already. Next Experience UI Framework intro. We'll do just kind of some quick level setting on terminology and what the UI framework consists of, what Workspaces and UI Builder are, when you should use Workspaces and Service Portal, that sort of thing. If you are a regular on these sorts of things, you may have seen most of these slides already, so we'll try to keep it pretty brief. And then we're going to get into a tips and tricks demo. This demo is really like common questions that we hear from people or things that we think would be helpful for people to know. I don't think any of these things are the things that we have enablement material out there for currently. And then we'll do some Q&A at the end, and that Q&A could involve us doing more demoing. It kind of depends on how much time we have and what kind of questions we get. So without further ado, let's get into this intro. What even is this Next Experience UI framework? So some terminology. I clicked out of the PowerPoint and now it's not letting me use the keyboard. There we go. So the Next Experience UI framework is our, I guess new is kind of in quotes at this point. It's been around for a little bit at this point. But the UI framework is our newer JavaScript framework built on web component standards. So, our previous front-end framework, which is still, something that we're using and customers are building portals with Service Portal. It was an AngularJS based framework. This new one is a framework that we built and we own so that we can kind of have more control over it. But it is just all standard JavaScript web components. So that's the UI framework itself. There is something else called the Next Experience UI. And this is a new version of our UI built on the new framework that we released in the San Diego release. You might hear terms like Polaris as well. Some of the properties are named Polaris. The theme is named Polaris. But that is the same thing as this Next Experience UI. So that was released in San Diego. In Vancouver, it'll be turned on by default. If you want to know more about that, you can watch last month's Next Experience Academy, where Ashley and Maria Gabriella went through and talked a lot about the new UI and what it means in Vancouver. I did see something in the chat where somebody said seismic. If you ever hear the term seismic or see it, that is the same thing as this as the Next Experience UI framework. That's our internal name for it. So externally, it's Next Experience UI framework. We've got workspaces, configurable and agent workspace. Agent workspace was kind of our legacy workspace. We introduced it in Madrid, and it was this tabbed-based interaction for agents. People really liked it, but it wasn't very configurable. So we took that feedback and kind of completely rebuilt workspaces so that they are extremely configurable now. And so that's where configurable workspaces come in. So with configurable workspaces, all of our different application teams and product teams at ServiceNow are building their own workspaces. Some of the most popular ones are Service Operations Workspace, CMDB Workspace, HR Agent Workspace, CSM Configurable Workspace. All of those are configurable workspaces that are built out by our different application teams. And then the last couple of terms here are just kind of things to keep in mind. Core UI is basically if you have an instance and you have not enabled the Next Experience UI, you're working in Core UI. You may also call it UI 16. And then classic environment is basically the way that you've kind of always worked in ServiceNow in forms and lists, but not workspaces. So whenever you hear us referring to any of those things, this is kind of what we're talking about here. And again, these slides will be available afterwards so that you can refer back to this. So I'll talk a little bit more about the tech stack that the new framework is built on. So again, this is a pretty modern JavaScript framework built on open source web standards. It's really similar to React, but it's not React. So we have found that if you take a React developer and kind of throw them at this new framework, building custom web components, they're up and running pretty quickly, although there are some slight differences. So this framework, with the framework, you can build these web components. And then what do you do with the components? Well, you can build your own components with our framework. We also have a number of components available for you by default. I think we're at around 250 at this point. So, most common use cases are covered by the components that we're shipping by default. The page that you're seeing scrolling right now is on our developer site. If you go to reference and then components, you'll get to this page from developer.servicenow.com, and it shows you all of the components we have available and what their properties and events are and how to use them. But yeah, so you have custom components. You've got these components that we ship by default, and all of those can be used in UI Builder. So UI Builder is the tool we're going to spend all of our, or most of our time in today when it comes to the tips and tricks. But UI Builder is basically our page editor and configuration tool, where you can come in and drag components onto a canvas. You can wire them up and hook them together, configure them, they fire events. From there, you can make really rich interactive experiences using UI Builder. Right now, most of what we're doing is configuring out-of-the-box workspaces or default workspaces that we're shipping with UI Builder, but it is possible to create your own workspaces, preferably with App Engine Studio, and configure those as well. So a common question that we get, so just to head this off in the Q&A, is UI Builder and Service Portal. Is UI Builder, has it replaced Service Portal? And how do those work together? Right now, UI Builder is primarily used for configuring and customizing the out-of-the-box workspace experiences that we're shipping. And Service Portal is used to configure or create portal experiences. And so what's the difference between a workspace and a portal experience? Where from our perspective, it's really the persona that's using the experience. So a workspace experience is targeted at a fulfiller persona. And so, one of the big differences between those personas is that for a fulfiller, this is typically a service desk agent or a customer service agent. This is somebody you're going to kind of train to use something, and they're going to be handling multiple things at the same time. Productivity is really important. You want them to be able to do everything as quickly as possible, and see lots of information at a glance. And so workspaces are really aimed at that persona. So we've got multiple tabs and record pages and all sorts of things for that persona. Service portals are generally something you want somebody to be able to use without any training. They should be able to use it probably on desktop or a tablet or mobile. They might want to interact with chat or a virtual agent. And so that's really the end user portal persona. So what does that look like practically if you're having to make a decision on which one to use? So maybe you have a persona that's not really a fulfiller, it's not quite a requester, an end user for Service Portal. How do you make that decision? So as of, we'll say Utah and Vancouver, this is accurate. Where UI Builder, there are some things that experiences created in UI Builder cannot do and are limited in. And so if any of those things are important to you, you're still better off using Service Portal. The next question here is always, well, are you going to deprecate Service Portal? There is no current roadmap on a timeline for deprecating Service Portal. If you need a new portal today, we would recommend that you build it in Service Portal. It's going to have quite a long life, moving forward. So if you've been around ServiceNow for a while, you know that we generally don't replicate things all that quickly. So a couple of things to call out from this slide. Responsive pages, you can technically create sort of responsive pages in UI Builder, but it's not native like it is in Service Portal. You're a little bit limited on the styling you can do with UI Builder pages. The catalog support is extremely limited. And so that's probably the most important thing in this slide when you're thinking about what a requester uses. And then, we're not supporting ATF yet, and public pages are difficult to set up. Oh, and we have more terminology now before we get into the demo. So a few more things. We're actually going to get into most of these today, but the first one is app shells. For us, an app shell is just an experience type. Every experience has an app shell associated with it. Our primary app shell that we're shipping at this point is Workspace. We're shipping more than 40 workspaces as of the Utah-Vancouver timeframe. And so what we're talking about is really just an experience type. There is a portal app shell that you can use to build out portals, but again, those should be kind of small departmental portals that don't need to be responsive, public, or have lots of catalog in them. Components we've talked about already, UI Builder we've mentioned already. Macroponents we're going to get into in the demo, but a macroponent is basically just the representation of the page on the back end. So you work with a page in UI Builder, you save it, and then it updates the macroponent, which is really the metadata layer that then our framework reads and serves up a page to you. when you're navigating to it. Variants are basically different versions of pages that you can show to people based on conditions like roles or URL parameters you're passing to the page. A page can have basically unlimited variants that you can serve up, based on all sorts of conditions. So, if you have 10 variants, you're navigating to one URL, and based on the person's role or what you're passing to the URL, you're going to serve up a different variant. And then lastly, UX page properties. I don't think we're going to get into these much today. But UX page properties are basically just properties that are specific to your experience. So, you define an app shell. So the Workspace app shell does the same thing, with all of your workspaces, but then you might want your menus to be different in different workspaces. And so that would happen through UX page properties, or could happen through UX page properties. With that, it is demo time. So I think John is first. And John, if you want to go ahead and grab the screen share and go ahead and we can start the first one.
Very good. And which one is the first one of the 3 demos I'm doing? Is it the playbook tabs we're starting with?
I believe it's playbook tabs.
Yep, cool. Here we go. And I got all kinds of windows here on the screen. Excellent. So yeah, so basically a fairly common request is to basically add custom tabs to a record page. To a record page. So in the old days, if you look for like adding a playbook record page tab to a workspace record, you'll find this article by Arnoud. And basically you have to be as smart as Arnoud to figure out how to do it, because it's a lot of work. You're jumping around all these like UX screen records and all this stuff, and modifying JSON, and it's terrible. It's a lot of work. And in addition, in the new Utah standard record page, even after you do this, it won't work for you. And the reason is that this Macroponent that we're using that was rendering the tabs is now based on a different technology. The good news though is it is a whole lot easier. So I am going to do this. I got some notes over here. I'm gonna do this pretty much cold. We'll see how it works. I may have to look at my notes here, but we're gonna see if I do it without the notes. But what I'm looking at here is I have a standard record page in Utah. It's an incident record variant. And what I want to add is I've got the details tab and a related list tab, but I want to add a tab for playbooks. Like I said, the old days, you'd go jump into the courses UX tables and fiddle with it. It wouldn't work. You wouldn't know why. It was a lot of work. But now you can do that. You can do most of the configuration right here within the tools. So to start with, I'm going to go here to the main tab, and I want to add a tab for playbooks. So in this case, I'm going to start from an empty container. Click next. And this is the label you'll see on the screen. No icon, that's good. I'll create it. And cool, playbook. So I'll move that up to the top. That'll be the first tab. Above, oops, there we go. Yeah, above details, cool. And then what I want to do is I want to add the playbook component here. So I like to do it over here from the tree here on the left. I'm going to look for playbook. Playbook, cool. And that gets added, nice. Got it. So it's using a preset, and the preset isn't going to work. It thinks it works right now, but when you actually run it, well, in fact, let's go ahead and save it. So we bring up the preset. So basically a preset is binding to values that actually aren't there in runtime. So we'll change that, but I'm just going to verify that when that playbook component basically with the presets is running in the context of a tab, you see you get a configuration error. So let's close that. Let's go back here. So what we need to do is we need to change the way the binding is happening to get the table and the sysid. So I click here. Right there, cool. And we're going to go back, kind of anyone is familiar with like a lot of like UIB development, you're going to be familiar with context props table, and then we're going to do the same with the sysid. So this one, sysid, cancel. We're going to switch it over to a data binding, the context props sysid. And I'm going to save it, and there it is. So it's that easy. Nice, much better. As we used to say back in Texas, for poor Arnoud, bless his heart that he had to go through that to just to get the tabs working in the old system. But as you can see, it's much easier to do now. Cool. That's it, Brad.
All right. So I get to go next. So hoping this would be a little smoother. Of course I got logged out. All right. Let's log back in here. I should have been logged in while John was going. So this next one, we're going to talk a little bit about user experience analytics. So if you don't know anything about user experience analytics, it's basically client side, what do we call it? Interaction tracking. So it was, I think we acquired a company a couple of years back and have replatformed that onto ServiceNow. And so with that, with user experience analytics, you can track all sorts of different user interactions in ServiceNow. So it works on mobile, service portal, next experience pages, all sorts of things. And there's quite a bit that you get by default in user experience analytics. We actually did a Next Experience Academy. I think it was either March or April. I think it was number 9, where the user experience analytics team came on and shared in a lot of detail all of the different things you can do with this tooling. And so if you're interested in it, I would recommend you go back and watch that. We're not going to spend a lot of time on, user experience analytics itself here, but what we are going to do is show you how to add a hook into user experience analytics from within UI Builder. It is super easy, but may not be all that obvious to start with. So this is the, let's say UAE, because I'm tired of saying user experience analytics, homepage. And you can see that there are a few different types of, there's a few different channels in here. So a lot of Next Experience, primarily workspaces, portals, mobile, and then virtual agent conversational interfaces down here. What it's doing, it's going to track all sorts of things by default. So fleet vehicle management is kind of my pet workspace that I like to play around with. But you can see in here, we've got all sorts of things on this dashboard, including, total active users. This is my personal instance, so there aren't going to be a lot of active users, sessions and page views, and how long people typically spend in there. And then some different things. You can set up funnels. And then the thing that we're going to look at are events. So by default, there are a whole lot of events that automatically get tracked through here. And I'm not going to click into it yet, but we will click into it in a minute. But I'm basically going to show you how to add more events. The nice thing is there are a ton of events that it already tracks, like loading navigations. If you're going to load Glab chat, if you click through a list, this is a custom one. There's all sorts of things that automatically get tracked. So if you are already using Workspaces or UIB experiences, it's probably a good idea to come in here, watch our previous academy, kind of see what you're already getting, what you're already tracking through user experience analytics, and then kind of see where else you might want to add things. So let's go ahead and hop into UI Builder. So I'm going to open UIB. And then we're going to open my fleet vehicle management experience. So this is going to be a little bit of an odd demo because user experience analytics doesn't track things real time. I think it collects data maybe once or twice a day. So I actually did this yesterday, so it would show up in today's demo. And of course, we're still loading. There we go. So I'm going to find my fleet vehicle management app, and then we're going to click into this dispatcher homepage. We also had a question that I answered in the Q&A, but I'll answer here as well about what are variants? Are they kind of like views to a table? And you could kind of think of them like that. I think they're a little different than that, but basically I have all of these pages that have a URL path, and then I can have multiple variants to my pages where I can order them, and then I can set audiences, which is basically roles, and then I can set conditions, which I'm basically saying, hey, if I pass the table incident, I may want to show this other variant instead of the default one. So what we're going to do now is we're going to click into this dispatcher home variant. This is a variant. If you're interested in this app, there is a Knowledge 23 lab called Building a Killer Workspace Experience. You can find it on Now Learning, and it'll actually walk you through building this page if you are interested. But this is this homepage. It's basically a heading, a big search bar, and then a couple of list components here. So for this thing, what I want to do is I basically want to track anytime somebody searches something, I want to know what their search term was and that they searched. So I'm going to click into that component. Anytime I click into a component, I can configure the component, I can style it, and I can add events. So for this component, one of its main event is search executed. So when I type something in and hit enter or hit the little magnifying glass icon, all it does basically is fire an event, and then it tells me what the search term was. And then from there, I can do all sorts of things with it. I could use it to filter these lists. I could use it to filter a different list. But we will look at that. So this is what was already here. What I added yesterday was this add event tracking. So if I go add an event handler, I get all of these default event handlers. One of them is add event tracking. And so this is really specific to the user experience analytics. So what I'm saying is anytime this event gets executed, I want to track it through user experience analytics. And so let's look at what I did here. So there's a couple of ways to do this, and I will tell you why I scripted it, which, it's like sort of scripted. I just put in some text basically. But the form itself, you provided an event name. This is an arbitrary name. You can name it whatever you want, and then you provide it some data. And so there are some, the data is just a JSON field. And so there are some things in here by default. There's some properties you can use. You can add your own custom property. The drawback of this is that I can't pass anything dynamic here. So this is all just static values that I would provide. So if I want to pass something dynamic, I use the script option, which I'm doing the same thing. I'm giving it a name, which is vehicle search term. And then basically in the payload for this event, if you will, I'm giving it a property. So my property is going to be search term. This is, again, kind of an arbitrary name that I created. And then I'm passing this search term from the event payload, right? So I execute my search event. It has a payload that comes with it. And one of the things in there is search term. So that's about as easy as it gets to set something like that up. And so if we test this, I can search something like, so these are all vehicles. So if I search Ford and hit enter, I get some more vehicles in here. This is not the prettiest page in the world, but now I am tracking anytime somebody searches, and I'm tracking what they search for. So if we go back to my user experience analytics, which is hidden by my zoom bar, let's get there. I did it. All right, I can click into the top events here, and we see that vehicle search term, I have 3 occurrences of this, and there's a couple of things I can do from there. But what I want to do first is just open that up, and we can see, hey, this is when this was executed. I just built it yesterday. So on the 18th, I searched 3 things. And then one of the nice things about it is it just takes whatever properties I pass it and tries to make sense of it for me. So yesterday I searched Ford, Honda, and Subaru. I searched 3 times. And so I get a little data visualization. Obviously, you could get much more complex with this and do lots of things. But it really is this easy, where you go in, add the event handler, and then you get the user experience analytics here. So, this is just something to kind of keep in mind as you're building out experiences or, customizing our experiences. What are some of the things you want to track? And once you figure that out, it's fairly straightforward to go in there and track those. All right. John, I think you are up with event payload tracking. or console.log statement.
Brad's got a pretty good, what he just showed is pretty good experience where you're like, hey, there's this new feature, this like UX event or whatever, and I need to figure out what my payload values are so I can call it, right? So the really common problem, and it's just something that especially when I first started working with Service Portal, was like knowing all these events are firing everywhere and you need to pass things around, like what is the payload, right? So what I'm about to show you might seem like pretty obvious, but it's like one of those like one weird tricks. So it's pretty easy to do like a console log, right, in script. And so I'd go edit my scripts and I'm like, hey, here, I got a script maybe that's doing this thing, or a script that's got some other logic in it or whatever, and I'd go add console logs to it. But then it occurred to me that basically these events can take as many, you can attach these scripts to any kind of event, and there's one thing they all have in common is that they've got an event, right? An event object. So this is a script I just recreated in every single project I work in. But I call it debug event. All I do is a console log name. Save that. And now the nice thing is I can attach it to pretty much anything. So a common one might be I'm trying to figure out what data is coming back in a certain event. So I want to, when the record when the form loading state changes, I want to do something like, well, what are the values available to me, right? Or if the record is updated, what are the values available to me, right? So for example, let me see, I've never done this before. Let's see what it gives us. So we can debug event, cool. And cool. And maybe I can go to the body level. Let's see what's going on here. Since I'm interested in form loading events, kind of curious which one lands first. Close this. Add event mapping, and on page ready, I want to log the event. Cool. And then of course you can take other activities that have their own events, and you can just append it. So you see there's this open record, and then I can add an event handler after it, right? Of course, you're gonna probably want to go back and pull these out once you get deployed to prod. But what this will do is give us this and this, and then you'll see these events. And so that I get the event name, and then the cool thing is I can then start drilling into the payload to figure out what the payload's about. So this example is the record form loading state changed. There isn't actually, it just loading is false. That's the only variable available. That way you can kind of dig in and see what's available to you in those payloads. This loading is true, might be good. So similar, same kind of schema. That's good to know. Macroponents ready. It's got a little bit more stuff here. Options, and then the element ID. Okay, cool. So anyway, yep, that's a script that I use on pretty much every project that I'm working on to help me kind of figure out what's going on with events.
Yeah, thanks, John. And I want to just reiterate that, that console.log in a script, this is a workaround, right? This is, you probably should be able to know what is in an events payload without having to log it to the console. That is feedback that we've gotten. It's something we know we're trying to solve for. But for now, that is probably the best workaround for, you have an event that fires and you're not really sure what kind of data you're getting in the event payload. That's the best way to get it at the moment. All right. So number 4 on our list, we're going to talk about macroponents. And so what is a macroponent? So in this new framework that we've built out, we've got UI Builder, which is really this page that we're looking at now. This is kind of a graphical representation of a page that is going to be served up to whoever navigates to the URL. And so there's all sorts of complicated things happening on the back end. And in order to store what's in this page, we have this metadata layer which is the Macroponent table. And so when you save a page in UI Builder, it takes a lot of the data from UI Builder and writes it to this Macroponent table it's mostly JSON. And then the engine that actually serves up these pages looks at that JSON and then serves you up a page. And so we're going to take a look at that metadata layer here and show you a couple of things around how you can use that to find things for the most part, but just kind of see like what's going on with your pages. So we're going to start with this page that we already looked at, the dispatcher landing page. And, one of the things that I want to see is, there's kind of a couple of things I might want to do with the Macroponent table. And that would be, maybe I want to look at versions. So maybe, this page has been saved a few times and I want to go back to a previous version, which, is a little risky to do, but maybe I just want to go look at what the differences are. Or maybe I have a component that it's not really obvious how to use it, and I want to go look for other pages that are using that component, and I can do that through the Macroponent table. And so for this example, we're going to try to find other instances of the search input component being used. So first, we're going to go back into the classic environment, and I'm going to find the Macroponent table by going sysux macroponent.list. This is just a little filter trick that's been around for a long time. I can type in the name of a table.list, and it will take me to that table. So sysux macroponent. And this is actually going to list the Macroponent table contains all of my pages. It contains subpages and page collections, and also components themselves are macroponents. So in UIB world, everything is a macroponent. You have different categories and things like that. But what I do is I go to this table enough to where I have kind of customized what I see here. And then I am sorting descending on updated, which I do pretty much on any metadata table in ServiceNow. But we can see that dispatcher homepage that I just looked at is the first one in the list. So let's take a look at what's actually in this Macroponent table. So one thing I'll say real quickly is if you can avoid it, you should not try to update these records like this. So they have three main fields that have a lot of JSON in them, and it'd be pretty easy to kind of corrupt a page just by, mistyping or something into JSON. So this JSON is all generated by UI Builder, but it can be helpful to look through when you're looking for things. So again, don't try to update this table unless you really know what you're doing and you really have to. So there's a few main fields on here. The first one is the layout field. So the layout field is going to hold, kind of the structure of your page and or some of the structure of your page and some styling and things like that. You can see that there's not a lot in here for a fairly complex page. The main field that we're looking at is the composition field. So the composition field is going to hold really the entire structure of your page, including your containers and your components. It's going to show you the properties for your components, events they're firing, all of the mapping between the two. And so this is really what I generally am searching. If I'm looking for something, I'm searching this composition field. So you can see in here, we've got, sysids for different components and things like that. And this is quite a long page or quite a long field. So there's a lot in there. But this is, again, the composition. And then data are all your data resources. So any data resources your page is using are represented in this data section. And there's a few more things down here. The state, dispatched events, things like that. And then one thing is any UX client scripts on your page. So if I switch back to UI Builder, I don't think this page actually has client scripts, but if I added a page script here and saved it, I'd have the page script and a related record. That's really the only thing that gets stored outside of this page. So everything else you do in UI Builder and save gets stored on this one record. One of the implications of that is that if you have multiple people working on the same page in UI Builder at the same time, they are almost definitely going to step on each other's toes. So you don't want them working on the same page at the same time. There are some things you can do around page collections, which we call extension points internally, to mitigate that a little bit. We're not going to get into that in this call because it's a little more complex, but just want to reiterate that. You will also see there's a versions related list. So this is helpful for me sometimes if I've done something to a page and I want to just revert back to the previous version. I can come back and revert back just like you can do on any metadata record in ServiceNow. So let's go ahead and look for what was the search input component. We want to find other pages that are using that same component. So I'm going to go back to the root of my Macroponent table. And first, we're going to find the sysid of the search input component. I think it's just called, it is this one, I think. All right, so we've got the search input component. I'm going to right click and copy the sysid. And then I'm going to come in and we're going to remove that. And then I'm going to search that composition for that sysid. All right, so it shows up on my dispatcher homepage. That's a good thing. So we are searching for the right thing, I believe. And then I see all of these other pages where it shows up. You know, I could, this is a good way if you're, especially if you want to use one of the more complex components like calendar or Kanban, this is a good way to find other pages in the instance that are using those, and then go in and kind of take a look at how they're configured and those sorts of things. So I'm going to stop here, and then I think John's going to talk about handled events, and then we may have a little bit of time left to do a Q&A.
Excellent. So I will share my screen. So my next topic actually is good. It actually is a good transition. Someone just asked a question about using scripts to emit events, which you can do. There's API.emit, but what I'm about to show you is a way that you can avoid that. So we're familiar with, you know, obviously, again, it's just such a fundamental part of the application. Pretty much every component you go to, you know, seems to submit some sort of event, right? And then, you know, you add an event handler, you get your nice list here. You see the scripts you created, you see these kind of page level events. And then there's a couple like core base level ones that come with the system. It's all great, right? So the question though is, well, what can I do as a developer? Can I do something similar? And then why would I want to do that? What you can do is we can actually add our own events that will then appear in that list. And so again, we're familiar with adding scripts. And so you might create a script that did several things, kind of wraps everything up. But I'd prefer to have, okay, I want to handle event that I might want to reuse, drop it in a few places. A great example would be Brad's demo of the activity tracking, right, for UX events. Well, maybe I want a certain type of activity that I want to reuse that. I want to do a couple things. I want to track the activity, and maybe I want to update a table. I want to do a query. I want to do something, and there might be a group of things you might want to do as a package. And you might want to reuse that, and so you don't want to have to go around necessarily to add that, you know, 2 or 3 events over and over again to different components of your page. So what you do is you can create your own handled event. And I apologize, I wish I had a more real world example, but I'll say, you know, update state and UX event, something like that. And then I can apply my own payload fields. And that would be like, you know, event name. It's like last sys ID, not sure. Last sys ID. Add that. Then you get a handle event here. So then where you define like what to do when this event happens is up here on the page event mappings. So what I can do is I can say, okay, when the update state UX event is called, I want to so add a state variable first. Client state, add last sys ID. Cool. And so then what I want to do is whenever this event's called on the page, I want to update the state and add an event tracking record. So I can do update where is a update client state parameter and say last added sys ID. Then now I've got access to the payload last sys ID, right? Because that was defined in the handled event record. So click out here, click and then add. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to also, like I said, I want to add a event tracking record. So, and for that I can use that. Again, I can use my payload to specify the event name. And obviously I have to do some more work here. And then I've got this group of events that are going to be responding whenever this event's dispatched. And so yeah, and so basically you can then attach it to any other event like you might be used to. For example, open record, I can add my event handler here. Update state UX event. In this particular case, I'd probably need to bind it to something. Might be the event name is John did a thing. Then maybe the last sys ID edited again. For example, oops. Favorite context processes, for example. So yep. And what this will avoid you having to do is basically build these big bundled scripts that have a whole bunch of different logic in there, maybe call different events. And instead of doing that, I personally prefer to use this interface to interact with events. Cool.
All right, that's the end of our little tips and tricks demo. We've got about 7 minutes left. So I've got a few more slides to go through. Feel free to add any questions into the Q&A panel, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can live here in the next 7 minutes. And then anything we don't get to, we will try to answer when we post this session to the community. So we've got a few different resources here. The Next Experience community on the community site is under Products Now Platform Next Experience. If you have any sort of UI Builder questions, Workspace questions, Next Experience UI, components, custom components, that's the place to go to ask them. There are a number of us that I get an alert anytime anybody asks a question on that community, and try to make sure that we at least address things, even if I don't know the answer. So that's a really good place to go to ask questions. We also on that community have a Next Experience Center of Excellence where we've got, I think, more than 60 articles across all the different Next Experience topics. You will see, you can kind of see in the screenshot, we've got, what's new in Utah, Tokyo, San Diego. That'll be updated with Vancouver pretty soon here. And then on Now Learning, we do have a UI Builder Fundamentals course. It's actually updated for Utah now. So if you want to learn more about UI Builder and Workspaces and are kind of starting from the beginning, that is absolutely the one I would start with. It's free and self-paced. And a really good place to start. We are looking at an advanced course as well that would go along with the fundamentals course. So stay tuned for that. And then these academies, I think there was already a link put in the Q&A to past academies, but they are all also on the ServiceNow community YouTube channel on the Next Experience Academy sessions playlist. So, I mentioned the user experience analytics session, which was number 9. where you can go back and kind of take a look at that one. So lots of resources for you. If you haven't looked at these in the last couple of months, it might be a good idea to revisit some of this because the community's been pretty active. We've been posting things. One other thing that I'll plug in here was we did, I think, 4 or 5 different labs at Knowledge and CreatorCon this past year related to Next Experience. So there was there was a custom components lab, a couple of UI Builder and Workspace labs. There was a service operations workspace lab and a theme builder lab. So if you want hands-on any of these products, most of those are on Now Learning. I think the service operations workspace one is actually on the community, but I believe we're linking to them from our Next Experience Center of Excellence there. We also have, what do we have here? So live on ServiceNow, all of the academies are a part of this live on ServiceNow event series that goes across all of our products. There's a QR code here if you want to subscribe to them and take a look at everything that's going there. And then if you want platform specific academy sessions, we do have a number of different platform academies that the Next Experience is a part of. So, general platform, which would include things like Flow Designer and Integration Hub and things like that. And then Analytics Mobile, Next Experience, AI, which nobody's interested in right now, right? And then conversational interfaces are all there. So I'll leave this slide up. And then any questions that anyone has, please put
Brad,
them.
I think Varsha had a question. I think it's a good one to reference. Excuse me. And so basically what he's observing, I believe, is that he started a CSM portal in San Diego. He's upgraded to Utah, but the record page still looks the same, right? So maybe you can talk a little bit about, the standard record page versus the BU record pages.
Oh, that's a great question. So in Tokyo, we came out with kind of a new, technology paradigm for components that we call presets and controllers. And so presets and controllers lets our internal dev teams build in presets for their components. So some of our components are pretty complex and they require crazy JSON and some of their properties. And so presets make it easy to where when I add a preset enabled component to a page, it comes with a controller, which is just a type of data resource where I can just configure the data resource and then it automatically maps all its outputs to the components. And so the first preset enabled components are all of the record page components. So if I add, form fields or a form header, it will automatically configure itself once I tell it the table and sysid that I want it to come from. And so as a part of that, we shipped a new record page template that uses all of those preset enabled components that we call the standard record page template. So that came out in Tokyo. The way that, if you want to see behind the curtains a little bit, the way that we work from the platform side of things is, our platform team, we build out all of these tools and then our, different application teams and our different BUs like ITSM and customer service and HR, employee workflows. They all use the same tooling that our customers and partners do, and then they build out their experiences. And so one of the things that all of our different workspaces are doing is they are kind of looking at, if they haven't already, when they're going to take that new version of the record page using the standard record page template and incorporate it into their workspace. So it depends on all sorts of things. But that may be one reason why you may not see the newest version of the record page in some workspaces is because that team hasn't uptaken it yet. And so we expect that they, most will eventually. But if you're using a workspace, you really want to see that new page, use the idea portal to go in and let them know that you want to see the new standard record page represented in that workspace. I think we are at it's the bottom of the hour. Yeah, that's what we call it when it's 00, right? So we're through here, and again, we will be taking this session, editing a little bit, cutting off the beginning, and then posting it to the community along with the Q&A, and then I think probably most of the links that we've talked about, including the knowledge sessions, will be in that community post. But again, thanks everybody. If you have any additional questions, go to the Next Experience community and ask your questions, and we'll try to get to them. But thanks for joining, everybody. Really appreciate everybody joining and sticking around.